Hello, everyone. Welcome to Small Talk. Well, I'm very pleased to have Richard Irving return today, and his topic will be the book, The Tyranny of Merit. Okay, Richard, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Uh, well, The Tyranny of Merit is one of a number of books that deal with a theme of how our society is kind of fragmented. And the author, and I'll hold the book up so you can see it, hopefully, The
Yes,
Tyranny of Merit, and it's by Micheal Sandel. So it was written around 2020. And he basically argues that we've had a society in North America. He's American, but in North America, we've had a society that's way too focused on merit. So, for example, who's number one? Nobody cares who's number two. And, if you look at a race, the difference between number one, number two, and probably number three are a few thousandths of a second in a foot race. Is there any real difference between them? Probably not a lot. So the argument's fairly simple. He says that by focusing on the best and the brightest, we've ignored everybody else. So we tend to over-reward the quote-unquote winners and under-reward the supposed losers. And that's led to a society with great divisions in it. So with an unequal society, we tend to get a lot of resentment. We tend to get a lot of people who are basically unhappy with their lot, and they feel disempowered and undervalued. And that causes, or at least is one of the causes, of some of the fragmentation we see in the US with the MAGNA movement, some of what we're seeing in Canada with the truckers' occupation of Ottawa, and some of the more extreme rhetoric coming from the CPC. There are people who are left out. The other problem with a merit society, it sounds good. You all will get the best and the brightest, and you go as far as you can. But it's not a perfect world. So the elites work very hard to game the system so it's in their favor. So if you have tremendous amount of money and a lot of power, you can influence government policy so it benefits you. And we see some of that in Canada. We suspect things that went on with Blavaland. We kind of wonder what's going on with the Ford government, sometimes in Ontario. And in the US, it's rampant. And that was discussed in another book. I'm just going to hold it up briefly, but it was Plutocrats. And it was written in 2012 by Chrystia Freeland, who is now our minister of almost everything in the federal government. And at that time, Chrystia was a reporter living in the US. So her book is typical of what you'd see from a reporter, a lot of compilation of facts, some summary, and perhaps not as much synthesis as one would like. But in the book, Plutocrats, she notes how the divisions in society between the very best, or the very top, if you will, and the bottom have grown. So, for example, this is in the US. In 1980, the average salary of a CEO was 42 times the average salary of a worker. In 2012, the average salary of a CEO was 380 times the average salary of a worker. And it's got worse since then. In Canada, the division is not so great. I think right now it's about 60 times between the very top and the very bottom. In the US, it's probably about 500. time. So it's grown. And that growth in purchasing power and in power, just plain power. You have a lot of money, you have power, has deepened the divisions in US society and has affected us in Canada, where people are feeling left out. And I addressed some of that in the previous talk that I did with you, Nancy, about questions Canadians need to discuss. So the problem, coming back to the tyranny of merit, is that people who have done very well tend to believe that it's all their own doing. Like, I deserve it. I worked hard. I really tried my best and I won this and I'm deserving of it. And the converse is also true. People who are losing out feel, well, I didn't do as well. I guess I don't deserve it. But that doesn't breed acceptance. It breeds resentment. Like, why are these people getting all the goodies and I'm getting nothing? So what do we do? Well, there aren't any easy solutions, but there are other people who write about these things. Mark Carney, and I'll hold up one other book that you might want to take a look at. Mark Carney, in his book, Values, it's a 650-page tome, so it's quite a read. But he argues that one of the problems we have socially is that we've confused value, where we attach value to things, and our values, where we say certain things have value intrinsically. For example, why does a hockey player earn several hundred times as much as a teacher or nurse? What's a hockey player ever done for me? Not much. Nurses, school teachers, EMS people, they do stuff for me. Even a garbage collector does stuff that I find valuable, because if you have a garbage strike, people get upset pretty quickly. If you have a hockey strike, you know what? We could live for a while without it. So Carney is addressing, among a lot of other things, how we need to reset our value system in society. And that is the same problem that Micheal Sandel deals with in The Tyranny of Merit. And he recounts, for example, with the, you'll remember the American admissions scandal, where some people actually went to jail for getting fake records to get their kids into top schools. And most people feel that's wrong. They shouldn't do it. But Sandel goes a little deeper and says, well, it's not just how much you pay to get into a top school. The people who get in, do they deserve it? Well, what did they do? They're intelligent. What did you do to merit your intelligence? Absolutely nothing. What did you do to merit being born to a wealthy family who could give you the kind of resources you need to succeed? You did absolutely nothing to merit that. Now, maybe you worked hard on top of that and you used your advantages. So Sandel has introduced the concept of equality of condition. And the idea is that we need to create a society where people have access to the tools and services that they need to go as far as they possibly can. And obviously, in all societies, if you're wealthy, you have access to more tools. For example, when I lived in France, it was pretty clear that the people who got into the Grande École, by and large, came from fairly wealthy families who could afford the tutoring and special classes and special enrichment that would help them compete in the exams. And people from poorer parts of society just couldn't afford to do that. So most of the people, not all, but most of the people who went to Grand Écoles were wealthy, which meant that France, in effect, was losing out on talent because there were probably a lot of poorer people who would have performed well. Sandel has some solutions for education which apply more in the US than in Canada, which would be one, anybody who has a GMAT that's above the floor goes into a pool and they just choose people at random. Because as a professor, I know that the GMAT doesn't tell you a whole lot about anybody's success. We also have to look at how we can reduce the inequality in society. Some people have proposed a universal basic income, and there's some evidence that it actually works, both in increasing employment, because unlike the opponents of the UBI, evidence would show people who are given a universal basic income get some education and training and tend to look for a job so they can better their circumstance. So that might be one way of increasing the equality of conditions so people can afford to get trained and educated. This isn't a new problem. Back in China in 700s, 800s, there was a very well-established bureaucracy and formalized testing for people to enter the bureaucracy. And I've been reading, I don't know why, The Banished Immortal, which is the life of Li Bai, who was one of China's most famous poets. And he wrote the exams and he did reasonably well, but he found it extremely difficult to get a government position. Not because he wasn't smart, he was smart, but because he was a bit of a loose cannon, and the bureaucrats who could recommend him were afraid that he might embarrass them. So even though he was highly qualified, it was very difficult for him to get a reasonable position. So instead, he became a drunk and probably one of the most famous poets that China had, which is great for China, but in his lifetime, he struggled tremendously. So the fact that we have educational and hiring barriers for people is nothing new, but we need to do what we can to try and reduce them. And in his closing statements, Sandel basically, and I'll quote from him, "For all our striving, we are not self-made and self-sufficient. Finding ourselves in a society that prizes our talents is our good fortune, not our due." And he goes on to note that in societies that have higher degree of equality. In other words, the ratio between the incomes at the top and the incomes at the bottom is smaller. And he specifically quotes Canada, Denmark, and most European countries. The social mobility of people is much greater than it is in the US, where there's this huge disparity of income and opportunity. There are different approaches to solving this. I haven't seen anything that, to my mind, is really a comprehensive solution to the problem. One of the suggestions is that we need more public spaces where people can interact across socioeconomic classes. So bringing people together from disparate backgrounds is one way that perhaps we can move some way to healing some of the divisions. It used to be that church was one of the places where people got together. So whether you were rich or poor, everybody went to church. They would see each other in the congregation. They might sing in a choir together. And there were some social leveling effects from that. There were also some social divisions from it too, depending on how people behaved. We used to have more public spaces where just random people would congregate and mix and talk. And I suppose Tim Hortons is perhaps the closest we have to those public spaces, or other coffee shops. But in our electronic forums, it tends to be more divisive. The algorithms that are used by Google and every other social, Facebook, all the other social media companies, tend to feed us more of what we already look at. So we don't tend to see other opinions. So I seek out other opinions. And I've just been reading a book by one of the Koch brothers, Koch brothers, from the US, who are multi-billionaires, and they fund the Republican Party. So most of their attitudes, I would assume, are diametrically opposed to what I believe in. But at the same time, the book has identified problems we have. Welfare for business is a problem. It's a problem in the US, and it's a problem in Canada. Giving huge amounts of money to businesses and often finding that they're not paid back, or the investment of public funds is not a good investment. He talks about bottom up, and I agree with him, although I'm not sure I agree with his analysis. But basically, what we need in our country, and to perhaps alleviate the tyranny of merit, to get us back on track to identifying and having a society that has values that are more in line with normal human values, is to open up dialogue with people we disagree with, talking to people whose opinions we may either disagree with, or in some cases find quite abhorrent. There is no solution other than, engaging with our fellow citizens. So a couple more examples, and then we'll get off the hook. When Hillary Clinton referred to the MAGA supporters as a basket of deplorables, she did a couple of things. She kind of energized some of the Democrats who pretty much thought the same way, and probably many of us in Canada who thought the same way. But she totally antagonized the MAGA followers, and possibly a large group of people who were kind of on the fence. But they said, you know, that exemplifies the elitist attitude of a large group of people. And we have some of the problem here in Canada with excessive political correctness, excessive demands that everyone look and think the same. And I'm kind of in the middle on most of these things. But that's not how we engage with people. We engage with people, first of all, by listening to them and hearing what they have to say. And then maybe after we've listened to them, they will listen to us and hear what we have to say. So when I got thinking about this, I keep thinking about, what about the interquartile range, the middle 50% of all of us, of the citizens? These are the people who are not at the top. They will never be at the top. They're in the middle, but they still do a good day's work. They contribute something of value. They may actually contribute a lot more value in certain ways than the people who we ostensibly value by paying them large amounts of money. For example, care for the elderly. We all say how important it is, but if you look at where we put our money, we apparently don't value it. The people who provide care directly to people in seniors' homes are some of the lowest paid workers in the country. They typically have to work at 2 or 3 jobs to make a living because the homes give them part-time work, except in some of the not-for-profits where they're unionized or they have full-time jobs. And the turnover is immense. So when governments say, well, we're going to increase the number of care workers, well, they can increase the number of people that take the training, but they won't stay in the job very long. We look at nurses, and I've recently had some experience with the healthcare system in Ontario, which I found generally good, but when I talked to some of the nurses, most of them are working part-time. And what has happened is we've farmed it out. So we have private companies that are now charging profit to hire the nurses that used to work for a hospital. The benefit to the nurses is they get paid a little more, and even more importantly, they get to choose their shifts. So they're not working 12-hour shifts, 7 and 8 days a week. That says something about how we actually value people. And at the same time, we have singers, sports figures, politicians, CEOs like Galen Weston and others who are earning obscene amounts of money. And is it because they're providing value, or is it because our value systems are simply out of whack with what I would consider to be traditional Canadian values? So what do we do? Well, the first thing is it's not going to happen by whining about it. If we want change, we have to become politically active. And I don't care if you're active in the Conservative Party, the Green Party, the NDP, or the Liberals. But unless we get out and we basically tell politicians through our voices and our votes that we expect better. We expect better values, we expect better policies, and we expect better cooperation. The rampant partisanship. Well, I'm going to fire up my base because we want to win no matter what. We'll do whatever it takes. It may be good for your party if you win. It's not good for Canada. What we need are political parties that are willing to cooperate on big things that are important to all Canadians. And yes, they may have different views, but at some point they have to come together for the good of the country. So we need statesmanship. And if we demand statesmanship from our politicians, we may get it. If we don't demand it, we won't get it. And I realize, Nancy, that we have a little bit more time, but I think I would like to end it there. And I would like to just tell people that I have written a summary of Mark Carney's book. It's available as a PDF. And if they contact you, Nancy,
Yes.
you can send it on to me, and I will send them a free copy of the PDF that they may find useful.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much, by the way. That was very thought-provoking. I was listening intently, and I hope
Good. You didn't fall asleep then.
no.
Oh, good.
Always a good thing, yeah. So anyway, thank you, Richard. And I want to
Thank
just
you.
thank everybody for watching. I hope you continue to do so. And Richard will definitely be back on. Okay, so stay tuned. And
I just have to tell you, Nancy, I'm going to be traveling in April and possibly in May. So definitely in June, if you'll have me. If I'm back in the country or able to put something together before that, I'll let you know, but let's plan on June.
Okay, that works because I have no more spots left for April anyway.
Okay,
So
good.
that's fine. So yeah, when you get back, you can get in touch with me and we'll set something up. In the meantime, everybody, thank you very much for watching the show. Please continue to do so, and I will get that information from Richard so that you can, if you're interested, contact him. Okay, and thank you, everybody. Take care and peace out.
Bye-bye.